When you are learning a new modality or intervention and beginning to implement it with your clients, such as the brain spotting training that I have begun. I've been in this field for over 30 years and feel pretty confident most of the time in my work. But as I'm beginning to introduce brain spotting to my clients, imposter syndrome is setting in.
Welcome to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. Hi, I'm Janine Wolf, and I'm your colleague down the hall. I have a passion for helping fellow therapists get the clinical and collegial support we all need to do this work. And wow, it just keeps getting harder every day. I'm the founder and facilitator of the Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. I have been a social worker for almost 30 years, and I own a successful solo online private practice. More of us than ever are practicing in solo or online practices, and we all need colleagues to process cases with, commiserate with on those really hard days, and also to celebrate our successes with. In this podcast, I'll bring you insights about trends and changes in our field and sit down with amazing therapists who are doing amazing work. We'll discuss fictionalized cases, ways to practice sustainably, and of course, there will be plenty of laughing. I love laughing with friends. I'm so glad to have you as one of my colleagues down the hall.
Hello, everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolf, and today I want to talk about something that we don't learn about at all in grad school for most of us, and that is imposter syndrome. Of the many things that we don't get taught about in graduate school, imposter syndrome is something that is real and it does not permanently go away. It ebbs and flows over the course of your career, and sometimes it will be worse than others. This is a topic many therapists feel insecure about talking about, and you won't want to talk about it until someone normalizes it for you and you understand it as part of your work. Heaven forbid you raise this issue in a therapist Facebook group, because you're going to get all kinds of reactions for people, especially if you're dealing with a specific scenario. First, I want to talk about the types of situations when imposter syndrome shows up. Let's talk about 6 different situations where you might see this. Number 1 is when you're working with a client at the edge of your scope of practice. This can be an opportunity to grow your clinical skill sets. You think it will stretch your skill set to take on this client because you know that's how growth occurs. And imposter syndrome is going to show up. Second, when you are working with a client who presents atypically from your ideal client. When you initially met with them to see if they were the right fit for your skill set, they seem to check all the boxes. Early into the second session, however, you start thinking, oh crap, this doesn't feel like my typical case. And imposter syndrome sets in. Number 3, when you are learning a new modality or intervention and beginning to implement it with your clients, such as the brain spotting training that I have begun. I've been in this field for over 30 years and feel pretty confident most of the time in my work. But as I'm beginning to introduce brain spotting to my clients, imposter syndrome is setting in. Number 4, when you are fatigued. And we all can relate to this one, especially after the last 4+ years. We are working so hard. We have more clients than we can possibly see. People are reaching out for support. And I'm at the point where I don't even know many therapists who are accepting new clients. So when I have people reaching out to me and I'm tired, I'm most especially susceptible to imposter syndrome. Number 5, when you are reaching a place of growth, that imposter syndrome can pop its head up here too. Most of us don't usually recognize it, but looking back, you can see that it was coming. And again, this goes back to the brain spotting training. I should, of course, have realized that as I'm introducing this new skill set and this new therapy, that I was going to have some self-doubts, I was going to have some insecurities, and I should have been prepared that imposter syndrome was going to set in. And number 6, have you ever had this situation where you're working with a client and they are discussing their problem? And this is most of the time has happened when I have taken on a client where my intuition said, maybe this client is not the right person for me, but I override my intuition and my instincts and I take them on anyway. And so I'm sitting in a session with them and I'm thinking, wow, this person needs to see a therapist. Oh, wait, I'm the therapist. If you've never had that happen, I think you must be doing a really great job screening your clients and making sure they're a good fit for you. Because when we bring on people that are not a great fit and we are not getting support around learning what we need to do to support this person or the type of therapy that they need, or we're trying to decide if we need to refer them out, this is a thought process that can absolutely pop up. So, what do you do about it? Well, you want to take note of the specifics of the case or situation that's bringing this issue up for you. Okay. So look at, why is this case different or this situation different that all of a sudden imposter syndrome is rearing its head? You can also get support from colleagues. Those who follow me know I'm a passionate supporter of peer consultation and support. This is your number one source for recognizing and getting through a bout of imposter syndrome. You want to be sure to get support from your clinical consultation group around this, or a colleague that you have a good relationship with that can provide this type of support. But having ongoing support through the form of a peer consultation group that meets on a regular basis is really helpful to keeping the imposter syndrome monster at bay. When working with cases that stretch your skill set, and when you have clients who present in a way that differs from your usual client, check in with yourself. Assess your skills and see if this client is indeed outside of your skill set or your experience. Your peers can help you assess this and help determine if you can continue to work with this client with additional support and or training, or if it's in the best interest of the client to be referred out. Referring out is a topic that people get really heated about at times. I actually, because this came up so often in the consultation groups that I run through Collaborasis, I've taken several trainings on ethically and professionally referring out. People like to throw around the words ethics and around client abandonment, but we truly need to make sure that we can provide what the client needs. And sometimes this client might be sort of on the edges of the typical client that we work with, but because of things going on in your personal life or because of the caseload that you have, you recognize that you just don't have the bandwidth to be working with this client. And that's okay, as long as you clearly verbalize this to the client. You set a timeline about having at what point you're going to stop seeing them. A warm handoff is always helpful. If you can find a therapist and help transition that client to the other person, that's really helpful. But at the very least, you need to be providing 3 or 4 referrals for that client. Sometimes they are going to hang on to not seeking out those other referrals that you've given them because they don't really want to switch. And so that's when you might need to set a deadline with this person and help them find a therapist that they can work with. You want to assess your level of fatigue. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but therapists are all exhausted these days. And not everyone has stopped to realize the toll of the past 4+ years that have taken on you, the toll that's taken on you professionally and personally. This comes up all of the time. I see more and more therapists having clients in their caseload that are not making progress. And that's a huge indicator where imposter syndrome is going to be popping in, because the toll is on your clients as well, the toll of the pandemic. And so there are clients that we are seeing more than I've ever seen in the past, where they're simply not making progress. They are dealing with just trying to get through their day, trying to get through their life. They show up every week. They have things that they're talking about. You're helping with skills and boundaries and emotional support. And that's what they need most of the time, is the emotional support. And sometimes it feels like we're not helping our clients if this is what we're doing for them, but helping them maintain the status quo and not necessarily have the growth that we want to see is something that happens when you have a world that's been through 4+ years of pandemic, political unrest, all the different things that we've faced. You do your best to set aside the things going on in your life when you work, but it's becoming increasingly more challenging. And we keep hearing more and more about the ways that we need to provide self-care and boundary setting and all of those things. You want to seek support in dealing with burnout if this is occurring. It's sometimes hard to see the burnout yourself until it gets extreme or someone shares their concerns about it with you. I think it's good to figure out what your cues are that you're approaching burnout. I went through a period of time where I had a lot going on in my personal life. I had lots of exhaustion. My insomnia was at its peak. And I started realizing that I would be working with a client and I would think like, okay, I need to check the clock because we've covered a lot today. And for some reason, 12 minutes was the point where that would happen. I would look at the clock and we'd been in session for 12 minutes. And I quickly learned, okay, if I feel like the session should be wrapping up and it's only been 12 minutes, I need some time off. I need to take care of me because that's just not okay. You want to allow the feelings that you experience with imposter syndrome to flow, okay? As you experience the doubts that are typical with imposter syndrome, make sure you are allowing internal validation into the equation. Most likely, you're well within your bounds of experience and skill sets. But it's good for you to do that assessment if you are within your scope of practice, getting support from colleagues who can probably see things a little more objectively than you can see for yourself. And so that leads right into seeking validation externally. There's nothing more powerful than having a colleague affirm how awesome you are at what you do. It's also powerful to consult on someone else's case to remind you of this as well. So having a colleague not only affirm that, yes, this is a difficult case, and let's see if we can figure out, why this is, but also affirm that, wow, this is a hard case. I can see why you're struggling. No wonder you are having a hard time. Having that normalized is an amazing gift that you can give your colleagues and receive from your colleagues. Above all else, I want you to remember that this is very normal in our field. They do not prepare us for this in graduate school. Maybe there are some programs that are doing that, but the vast majority are not. Keep in mind that our knowledge and our experience are our product, okay? Our brain is our product. And so most of the time, we don't have measurable tests, we don't have lab results, we don't have objective data that we're using to look at how we are using our product, our brain. So you do want to remember that imposter syndrome will pass, and there are many resources to help you through it. But the first step is recognizing it, getting support, and then figuring out the ways that you can continue working in this field sustainably. I'm such a huge supporter of working in this field sustainably. And so make sure that you are managing your imposter syndrome along these lines as well. For everyone listening, there are new episodes of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast released every Thursday on all major platforms. Please remember, our work is hard. It doesn't have to be lonely.
Thank you so much for listening to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to colleaguedownthehall.com, where you'll be able to learn more about getting the clinical support you need and resources to help you work in a supported, sustainable way. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your therapy friends and colleagues. Subscribe to the podcast, and if you love this episode, please leave a review.